Hello, today we're going to look at the new Love It Red Cumulocity nodes. First we're going to take a look at how you configure the server, the Cumulocity server from these nodes, and how you provision credentials to Love It Red. Then we're going to look at how you create measurements and alarms and events from your Love It Red flow. Then we'll look at how you can manage the CloudGate directly from the Cumulocity server using the Love It Red Cumulocity nodes. And finally, we're going to look at how you can integrate your flow in your Love It Red flow with the Cumulocity server and retrieve configuration and execute script commands from the Cumulocity server. First, let's select the Cumulocity nodes. We can do this easily by typing C8Y into the filter box. All of the nodes start with C8Y, so this selects all of them. And now let's drag a measurement node from the palette onto the workspace. This will allow us to create some measurements. And to allow us to inject some measurements into the measurement node, let's get an inject node and drag that onto the workspace and connect the two. We'll also put a debug node onto the workspace so that we can see any error or warning messages in the debug pane on the right hand side. Now we're going to configure our measurement node that we've added onto the workspace. We open it up, and at the top here we can configure the platform node, which actually gives the parameters for the communication with the Cumulocity server. Usually the settings here, the defaults will be good if you're using the standard Cumulocity server. We can choose how we want to provision Love It Red with its tenant, username and password, either manually or automatically from the Cumulocity Bootstrap server. We can also override the Bootstrap server settings, the host name and the auth string. Here we configure how we want to communicate with the Cumulocity server, either by polling or by continuous connection, or both. Finally, we need to configure a measurement. We'll give it a simple name, and then we can add a fragment that indicates a temperature to the server. Here we have the fragment type, the name of the parameter inside that fragment, and where you actually want to extract the value that you're going to transmit to the server from in the message. And here we're saying that we want to extract it from the payload. And finally, the units for the measurement. And there we're configured. Now we can deploy, and we'll see in the debug pane that we've enabled automatic provisioning, but we have not set the CloudGate serial number up on the server yet. So let's move to the Cumulocity server and do that now. Now let's register the CloudGate on the Cumulocity server. We first need to go into the device management application and then into the registration area. I'm going to enter the CloudGate serial number in this box, and this means that the Cumulocity server, as soon as I press register device, will start to accept the CloudGate as it polls the server. And then we'll need to press an accept button here as soon as it's seen the CloudGate, and then the CloudGate will be registered and the credentials will have been provisioned to it. So let's try that. Press register device. We see waiting for connection, and now we see pending acceptance. We press accept, and the next time that the CloudGate checks in, it will not only update those credentials, but it will also create its device inside the device inventory. And here is the device that's been created. It hasn't yet updated the status. The server takes a little while to update the status, but it is now connected. We can now drill down into the CloudGate and have a look at what we see. You see now that the send and push connections have now been updated, and we can see that the device is online and that the push connection is active. You can see that the interval of 20 minutes that we set on the CloudGate, the default interval, has been updated on the server, and that the inventory has been filled in. The IMSI, the serial number, and so on. Now let's send a measurement to the server. First we need to configure what measurement we're going to send. You'll recall that inside the measurement node we put a simple temperature measurement with a single value which we're extracting from the message payload. So now we need to inject a numeric message payload to update the temperature on the server. Let's just inject a random number from 0 to 10, and we're going to repeat this at an interval of every 8 seconds. OK, we deploy, the nodes are starting up, they're started, and now the real time is online, and we're injecting measurements to the server. And you can see the first measurement has gone out. Let's go to the server and see what we see. On the server, the first thing we have to do is just refresh the page so we can actually start seeing measurements, since the server page actually caches the current operations, and we need to refresh it to get our measurements. So the server page is refreshing, and now we see we have a measurements option. Click on measurements, and we start to see that we have some temperature measurements coming in. If we stop them being aggregated and just look over the last minute, we can see the different measurements which have been sent. As you recall, we sent them every 8 seconds. And it's as simple as that to get a measurement up to the Cumulocity server from the Love It Red flow. I've disconnected the measurement from the inject node. And we'll now have a look at how we do the same thing with events and alarms. Again, I can select the Cumulocity nodes with C8Y, and we'll try and send an event. Again, we select the platform, but since we've already configured it, it's already automatically selected for us. And here we just say what the event type is. And we can put some text in. The event type and the event text can be overridden by the incoming message. The way to do that and the keys to set on the message are described in the info tab for the event node. Now we're going to select another inject node and connect that to the event and deploy. Now we can send an event to the Cumulocity server just by sending an incoming message. And you can see the event count has now incremented. Let's look at the server. On the server, we just select the Events tab, and we can see that we had our event with "This is the event text," which arrived a few seconds ago. We can also use the event node to send location updates to the Cumulocity server. We can just copy the event node, and instead of putting a custom type, we just send a location update. We don't need to put any text into that location update. Now, because I'm demonstrating on a CloudGate, but the CloudGate itself is not moving, normally I would use the GPS node, but I'm just going to use some simulated GPS data to generate a track to send to the server. First, we'll use the NEMA reader, which reads a NEMA file and then outputs the GPS fixes more or less at the same time that they were recorded into the NEMA reader, into the NEMA file. And then we're going to use a NEMA parser, which will parse that NEMA stream and generate fix and move reports from it. In the NEMA parser, we select fix and move reports, and then we just connect all of these together and click deploy. The NEMA reader starts reading the NEMA file, and the NEMA parser is starting to interpret it, and you can see we're moving, and it's going to start sending updates to the Cumulocity server as we get events, as we go around a corner or along a straight road. You can see here we've started to see some events. Let's go and see what happens on the server. Now on the server, I've done two operations. I've requested an inventory update here and refreshed the Cumulocity page, and you can now see that I have both a location and a tracking tab. If I click on the tracking tab, I get a real-time, if I select real-time, track of the progress of the tracks from the NEMA recording that I had. And in location, I can see where I'm actually located, which is around the city of Athens in the case of this particular track. And this will update as it receives the measurements from the cloud gate. These measurements are synchronized to try to track to turns on the road, to accelerations away from corners and so on, and movements over long distances, so that we get a fairly good track which corresponds to the path of the vehicle. At this point it's actually traveling down this road, so we'll come back to that a little bit later to get an update of where it is. Oh, there we go. So we've now turned right. If I selected real time here, then I would be able to see the track updating in real time. The location of the cloud gate is updated the moment one starts sending any location events to the server, and it will be updated every time that an inventory update is done, so on the polling frequency that we have. Finally, let's send an alarm to the server. The process is very similar to the event. We need an inject node to trigger the alarm. Again, the message can override a lot of the parameters of the alarm. I need to give it a type. I can set what I want to do with the alarm, whether I want to activate it or clear it, the severity of the alarm, my alarm text, deploy that, and as soon as the platform is ready, if I trigger this, I now get an alarm. Let's go and look at the server and see what we see there. On the server we select alarms, and now we can see that we created a major alarm. We can see the details of it, which device created it, and we can acknowledge that alarm or clear it. Now let's look how we can manage the cloud gate from the Cumulocity server. Obviously we're getting the inventory updates from the cloud gate, and we're getting status information on whether the cloud gate is actually connected to the server, and we can use that to create alarms on the Cumulocity server if the cloud gate has disappeared for a while. But what we can also do is update the software that's on the cloud gate. The software inventory is automatically synchronized with what software is on the cloud gate. Here we see the developer image, see developer config, the customer config, and the firmware version that we have installed at the moment, 262.01. We can update the firmware by selecting install firmware, and with a previously uploaded firmware into the firmware repository, we can install that firmware. I actually have a couple of firmwares here. This is actually the same one that's installed on the cloud gate, but we'll use it for the demonstration just to show that we can install it. We start the install operation, and if we go to the control tab, we can see that the firmware update is executing. If I set this to real time, as soon as the firmware update is completed, we'll see the executing changing to successful. When we upload the firmware to the CloudGate, we don't actually reboot the CloudGate at the end of the firmware upload, and that is necessary for the CloudGate to properly apply this new firmware. So to restart the CloudGate, we need to go to the main Control tab and select Restart Device. This will collect a new operation, which we should see here. There we go, restarting the device. And now we have to wait for the device to reboot, restart again, and then this executing tab will show that the execution of that operation has succeeded. The CloudGate is now restarted, and Love It Red is just starting on the CloudGate, and we should see the restart device status update to successful momentarily. And there it goes. Another useful measurement to get to the Cumulocity server to manage the CloudGate is the status of the signal strength of the 3G or LTE or 2G connection. We can do this basically by using the sig level node, wiring that onto the measurement node, and then instead of sending a temperature measurement, we can send a signal strength measurement. Add this in and give the overall type, signal strength type. And now all we need to do is inject an intermittent message of any type. It can just be a timestamp, and that should allow us to get a signal strength reading up to the server. Starting, and I can trigger one straight away so that we start to see some of these measurements coming up to the server. Again, on the server we need to refresh, which will allow us to see this new measurement. Go into the measurement settings, and we can start to see the signal strength. If I turn off the aggregation, the minutes, you can see different levels of signal strength. -8, -99, which is showing there, with the signal strength being updated to the server. Finally, let's look at how we can integrate commands which come from the Cumulocity server into a Love It Red script. To do this, we use the C8Y command node, and we use also the C8Y response node. What's going to happen is when we send a script command from the server, this is going to generate a message with a payload, which is the script command. And then we just need to do whatever operation we're going to do, and then change that payload to a text string that indicates the result of the command. In this case, I'm going to do something very simple, which is to use the change node to change the payload to indicate that it has actually passed through the flow. So I'm going to set the message payload to the message payload with done attached to it as a string. To link up all these three messages, three nodes, open up the command node, and the platform node is again automatically selected. Now what we can do is we can actually match the command string, and this is a real pattern match, uses Lua patterns, but a basic Lua pattern match is just to type something to match. So if succeed is inside that string, then this command will actually be matched by this command node. If it's matched by no command node, then the operation will fail, and you'll see the status on the server that it's failed. So let's configure that, deploy, and we'll go to the server to see what we can do. Just before I go, what I am going to do is I'm going to link the debug node up to the output of the command node so we can actually see the command come in through the command node. You'll notice that now we have an option shell, which is a new one, which allows us to execute these commands. And these commands can only be executed when the device is online. That means that when a poll has been successfully received within the polling period. So now we can type a command. If I type a command test, this is not going to match succeed. So I should get an error message. I get an error message that the command is not matched by any command node. However, if I type succeed and send that, this is successful, and you can see it's added done behind the succeed. And you can use these commands to trigger actions inside your flow to do operations like maybe doing a poll of a Modbus device or something of that sort. Going back to my flow, I can see that the succeed string was actually sent, came out of the platform command node. I see that I've got a count of 1 command, and I can see it displayed in the debug window, the succeed string that I sent. Now let's look at how we use the configuration node to use the Cumulocity server to configure a LoveItRed flow. I select the configuration node, and I need the response node as well. And I'm going to get a debug node to show what's happening out of the configuration node. And what I'm going to do is use the configuration, the freeform configuration capability on the Cumulocity server to send a JSON string which will actually provide some parameter to my flow. So what I'm going to need to do to turn that into a table is to use a JSON parser node. I'm going to use another debug node to show the output of that. And when we receive a configuration and we've parsed it, we might do something with it, and then we need to send what we've actually set back to the server through the response node. So firstly, I'm going to use a change node again to perhaps change the actual configuration that's set. And then I'll need to use another JSON parser node to turn that back into a JSON string to send back to the server. So that will be my full flow. And in this change node, we're going to assume that there's a parameter test in that JSON string, and we're going to set it to 2. So from the server, I'm going to send a JSON string with a parameter test with a value 1. Here I'm going to set it to 2, and we'll see how that works with the server. I need to link this node to the platform node, and that should be good, and I can deploy. Now I'll go back to the server node, and here in the configuration, you see now I have a configuration tab. I've set this up to send some JSON with a parameter test equal to 1, and I can save that operation. The configuration has been saved, and if I refresh my page here, you'll see that actually the configuration that was saved was test 2. Now obviously I don't have to change this configuration. I could have sent the string directly back. Forget all of this complexity. Just send exactly what I got back to the server. Here I'm sending test 2, save that, and you can see, going to the debug tab, that I get, let me clear that and send it again. Save. Out of this debug node, I get the string test2, and out of this debug node, I get the parse string with a table with test equals 2. One thing to know about the configuration node is this is the case where I'm actually setting something on the server, but when my flow starts and initially connects to the Cumulocity platform, as part of the startup process, automatically query that configuration from the server, and I'll produce the actual configuration that's stored on the server at that point. Still send that back to the response node, although actually nothing is sent back to the server, since that is really the configuration that is on the server. And that's not an operation, it's just a query of the configuration. This can be used to configure your flow and set parameters on the Cumulocity server that can be used as parameters for your flow. For example, a Modbus slave ID or a backnet device ID could be set here for your particular query setup. And obviously this is using JSON, but we could just as easily use something else, like some kind of key equals value pair, which you would then have to parse in some way on the inside your flow as you received it. So during this demo, we've showed you how to set up the new Cumulocity nodes, how to configure the platform node, and to provision Love It Red automatically with a tenant username and password, how to send measurements and events and alarms to the Cumulocity platform, how to manage the CloudGate device, upgrade its firmware, restart it, request inventory from it, how to integrate commands into your flow, which is sent by the Cumulocity server, and how to send a response back, and how to use the configuration scheme within the Cumulocity node to configure your flow, and also how to send location and tracking updates to the Cumulocity server. I hope you found this interesting.